welcome back to the stage, Deena Fidas.
Hey, thanks everybody. How's your morning been? Terrific, terrific. We are so grateful for all of you, the devoted commitment you've got here. Let's also give a round of applause to our incredible partners at Encore, the entire MGM staff. So many people are making this a success. Well, thank you all so much. So, those of us in this work feel extraordinarily privileged to be full-time advocates. And it's also important to note, and we certainly get sobering reminders, that we as advocates don't live in a bubble. Just a few minutes ago, a very dear colleague who lives in Georgia scurried to me, showed me the phone, that the Georgia Senate has passed one of the most comprehensive anti-trans bills in the nation. Usually when we hear omnibus bill, we're thinking proactive, forward momentum in the right direction. This is real. And none of us emerge from this level of attack unscathed. You know, scan the headlines. Some of you have been hearing very much about this in our tracks. Since 2015, the number of anti-LGBTQ+ bills flooding state houses has exceeded 2,000, so in nearly a decade. And something I always want to point out to folks, while the number of bills that actually passed into law is indeed a fraction of that, thankfully, it's a fraction of that because of all of you, because of the ways that you've leveraged your stories inside your companies, because our companies, as fatigued as folks are, as stretched thin as they are, have still found their voice and their might to weigh in on our behalf in the public square. Last year had the dubious distinction of being the most anti-LGBTQ legislative session in US history, with over, when all was said and done, over 550 anti-LGBTQ bills. It's just about the end of March, and we are already several hundred more in. So even before we get to the number of, well, how many actually became law, think about that for a second. If you are one of the many Gen Zers or the next Gen Alpha, those who are, you know, about 18 or a bit younger, like my own stepchildren, this is the world they're growing up in. And the ways that the adults in their lives, lawmakers, headlines, and more, are talking about them is utterly dehumanizing, and it's devastating. You know, as some of us have been talking about, we just found out in a major national study that of those states that had passed anti-LGBTQ bills, the hate crimes at the school level has quadrupled. So, also in talking to one of our incredible leaders here, she put it so artfully. She said, you know, sometimes we're somewhere between passionate about this work and panicked. And both are true, right? That was a Jen Hendersonism, if anybody wants our amazing Jen Henderson. So it is our job, in partnership with you, and in this case in partnership with one of our extraordinary corporate leaders, Wells Fargo, to pull the lid on this and to actually get into some metrics so that we can be equipped in our change work, not just with our experiences and our stories, not just the hearts and minds, but the business consequences of these bills. So if I may ask there we go. So we set out, who here was at Summit in Florida? Excellent, so perhaps you remember, it was a long, beautiful night, but we talked about folks filling out our Talent on the Move survey because we wanted to measure the direct impact on individual LGBTQ+ employees or those who have family members who are LGBTQ+. You know, one of the fastest growing major stakeholder groups in corporate America are parents of trans and non-binary kids. We wanted to then go from the individual level to this more macro level. What is the business cost of anti-LGBTQ+ legislation? We are so happy that hundreds of businesses have joined the fight, and many will vocalize this as standing on the right side of history. Well, to those skeptics or those just stretched thin wondering, you know, as sad as these bills are, is there really a business cost? We needed to actually measure that. And as we know, what gets measured gets managed, in other words, acted upon. And now lastly, of course, and I'm gonna, after showing you some of this data, call up Jean Marie Navetta to really facilitate with us how we can take some of the learnings as to what is the path forward, what can businesses do to drive inclusion and belonging in the face of these public policy shifts. And so that doesn't, it's not an A to B as in there are bad bills out in the world, your only option is to speak out on the bills. There are a number of other things that companies can and should do to care for our community. So today, this morning, it hit the wires. Hopefully you all get your LinkedIn updates and everything else from Mountain Equal. Talent on the move, where do we go from here? LGBTQ plus talent mobility and business considerations amidst a shifting legislative landscape. So sometimes the work of social research is putting metrics or data behind something that, and it's okay to say this, is a bit of what we call no-duh analysis, but we still need the analysis because, as we know, our C-suites need to see the data in hand. This is staggering, staggering, staggering. 9 in 10 respondents feel that LGBTQ plus equality has worsened in the last year. Nearly half of our respondents of LGBTQ and also allied employees across the United States, nearly half feel less safe in their home state because of changes in the legislative landscape. And a third have considered relocation. As you'll see in the report, and what do we know, the trio of considerations that nearly every C-suite leader wants to talk about: attraction and retention of talent and a diverse, productive workforce. These anti-LGBT bills cut at the core of that. Now, as I mentioned, we've seen the impact at the school level. Well, what happens when grade school bullies get business cards or get their first job? Well, apparently their bullying doesn't let up. And we found that about 1 in 4 LGBTQ plus folks across the country, even in the litigious environment, we think, oh, everybody's had basic training, that doesn't happen here. Not the case. 1 in 4 report hearing jokes about the LGBT community in their places of work. A very, very sobering data point here: the vast majority of those jokes are about trans people specifically. This is unconscionable. Now, even for those companies that are sort of doing the right thing, they've got the right policies in place, we would think we'd then have a vehicle. We can at least talk to our leaders and say, look, you may not know this about me, but my 15-year-old has come out as non-binary, and we're seriously having to look to move out of our state. Well, 40% of respondents do not feel comfortable even broaching that topic with their direct supervisors. And you can pull from that, and it's in the report, the ongoing anguish, stress, mental health, and well-being effects of all of this. To be suffering, sometimes in isolation, whether individually or on behalf of a family member, and then to not even be able to trust the workplace culture that, yes, I can confide, I can go to my supervisor and talk these issues through. And nearly 4 in 5 of respondents have reported that absolutely anti-LGBTQ laws would affect whether they relocate for a job or not. As so many of you know, when we were rallying the business community from HB2 to Indiana and almost every state in between, yes, we framed it in terms of the human right to safety and well-being and the reputational damage done to a state that passes these bills. But we also know, even for our friends and nearly allies, maybe they stumble on our alphabet, the LGBTQ, BLT, but what they can understand is you might have a senior executive in California who you're trying to bring to one of the states with one of these bills on the books, and unbeknownst to you, that person is the parent of a trans kid, or that person's partner has transitioned or identifies as non-binary or needs medical care that's now been criminalized in that state. That flies in the face of the nimbleness that businesses have traditionally enjoyed in this country when it comes to moving around their own people. You could even arguably sort of you could bracket the LGBTQ part for a moment and say this is literally infringing on the ability of businesses to invest, to move their people, to make smart choices. So we're not here to make an exclusive pitch around public policy. We do know that reputationally and in terms of what your people need, your stakeholders, not just your employees, but many of your shareholders want to see a level of public commitment. 7 in 10 of our respondents did not feel that their company, in fact, responded sufficiently. You know, some of you are nodding. We have had a fair amount of success in this space, mobilizing our businesses. And again, I've been in the dialogues with you, as has the team. We know folks are tired. We know that you can't believe you're getting another phone call on another coalition or another state on the precipice of passing a terrible bill. Well, we see on the flip side of that, no one's happy. You know, as much as you have ask fatigue, your LGBTQ employees have attack fatigue. We're tired. We're tired of seeing our lives dehumanized, seeing our families dehumanized, and we expect more of the companies and the workplaces at which we've given so much. We give so much of our time and our talents, and I think for many of our respondents, they're looking for a little more of that back. They want to know, if I give you my 110%, do you have my back? Now, when we got a little more brass tacks with our respondents, because again, it's not that public policy engagement is the exclusive avenue of support. We looked at some other, common sense best practices, but common sense best practices that are still not universal or consistent. So, a little over half saying, yes, we need more remote work options. We need more flexible work. As much as we're seeing some CEOs in this country say, oh, everybody back in the office, well, what if that is now your danger zone, if you will? What if you were able to move in with a relative in a safer state, and now the call's been put out that you've got to show up in Jacksonville or in another city that now no longer feels safe to you or your family? We've also seen that individuals want support for out-of-state health insurance benefits. And that's not just unique to trans non-binary folks. It's also come up in the context of reproductive health. And then we're also seeing a lot of our respondents, a lot of the members of our community have this really practical approach. It's like, hey, we know you can't fix everything, but let's ensure that there's a vehicle in our EAPs. A lot of us at some point in our careers depend on the EAP to navigate a challenging situation, and now is the moment to educate your vendors, educate your HR teams that this is real. And before I bring up Jean Marie, what I would suggest to each of you, because I always wonder, what can we each do? Maybe I'm not in government affairs, or maybe I'm not in HR. And my ask, my challenge to you is to, following this event, tell someone about this topic. Forward this report, tell them about this topic, because if we are proactive in naming and articulating the challenges that our community is facing, you are effectively breaking the silence that some of these respondents who are too scared to talk, too scared to approach their supervisors, you're actually breaking that silence for them. And folks will continue to come to you as an ally, as a source of support and knowledge. So, sorry to be the one with all this sobering news. It is real, though. It is real. As much as I think, maybe some of you have heard me say this, one of my favorite expressions, some moments, sometimes, some people will break your heart, and others will put the heart back in you. And so, as heartbreaking and sobering as this data is, we know we've got each other. We know we have smart strategies, and we also know we have optimistic, energetic leaders like Jean Marie who will put the heart back in all of us. So let's bring up Jean Marie.